Okay, so we left off, we read all of chapter 19 of Joshua last time, and welcome back to Marlene from the whirlwind trip to Portugal. I hope
Thank
you
you.
had a
Thank
good
you.
time. Um,
By the
and
way, I was in a synagogue there, though. I'm gonna just say this real quick. A real synagogue on last week on Shabbat for the whole service.
oh, nice.
Ah,
Yeah, so it was really nice. And yeah, you had to have, of course, security, but
Yeah,
even though we didn't
sure.
download the passport ahead of time, he let us in. But
Right,
yeah, it
right.
was very nice. Yeah.
I have it. You have to read note 51 first.
We have to read
Note
yeah,
51
ancient
at the start
Israel.
of class.
I have a do ancient Israel on chapter 19 before we go on to chapter 20. So we had read all of chapter 20 in this with the
Include-
commentary, but
Oh.
we haven't read ancient Israel, so that will do. Okay, so we're on page 81 in ancient Israel, below the line. So this was a continuation of distributing the territory to the rest of the tribes. Shimon, Dan, the other tribes, and lists in great in great detail the towns and villages that are in these tribal territories. So below the line, their estate was within the estate of the Judahites. That is for Shimon. Unlike the other tribes, Shimon did not have a territory with clear-cut boundaries, but rather enclaves within the territory of Judah. This situation is reflected in the curse Jacob pronounces on Shimon and Levi: I will divide them in Jacob, disperse them in Israel. Levi's dispersal was manifested in its having no tribal territory, only Levitical towns. The anomaly of the portion assigned to Shimon is explained in verse 9. So what I'll say, I've said this before, which came first? It's like a chicken and the egg kind of thing. Did Jacob's foretelling in this blessing to his sons, was it a prophecy, or was Jacob's blessing in chapter 49 in Genesis written after the fact? So had the territories already been assigned and then the Torah was written to reflect kind of ahead of a sort of an ahead of time kind of look at what the situation is on the ground right now as the Torah is being written. You can make an argument either way. Obviously, the traditional argument is the Torah came first, but the biblical scholarship just questions that. So, and that you find in the Torah and in the Bible um, stories that kind of explain why things are the way they are right now in Israel at the time that the Bible is being written. So though it's an untraditional approach, an untraditional religious approach to understanding the Bible, it's still, as a non-Orthodox rabbi, important to think about. Okay, below the line, yes?
Excuse me, where are we? I had a
Oh, yeah.
house problem.
No, okay,
Okay.
we're on page 81 in ancient Israel. I just read below the line. Now we're on page 82.
Thank you.
So, the Vale of Iftach El, the Masoretic text here reads the sons of Iftach El. So, in other words, the Masoretic text is you have the accepted authoritative text, that's the Masoretic text, that has the letters and the vowels in it. And then there's also the accepted way it's supposed to be read. So there's the way it's written, which could imply that it be read one way, but then officially how it's supposed to be really read. It's called Kri and Ketiv. So so that's the master. We have that with the Torah. We have that with other texts as well of the Bible. The official authoritative text of how it is supposed to be written and how it's supposed to be pronounced. So, yeah.
Vale means what? Valley?
Valley, yes.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
So let me just look at verse 27, which this is on. Yeah, just a second. It's on, yeah, here we go. It's on page 114 in our Sansino text. Oh, wait, 27? Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. So it says uvegei. The text says uvegei yiftach. So but the gimel, we know that as a gimel is written, it could easily be mistaken for a nun. You can easily make a mistake of a gimel for a nun, right? I don't have a piece of paper to write it. Well, here, if I show it here, right? The way I write gimel and nun, take a look. It looks pretty different, but there are some fonts that would make that diagonal line of the gimel to be thicker and not as diagonal. So if it's not as diagonal and it is thicker, a gimel could look very similar to a nun. And so the word gay in Hebrew is valley, and but if it's a nun, vinay means sons of. Okay, so that's what Alter is saying. The Masoretic text here reads, the sons of Yiftach El, a noun that doesn't make sense as the object of the verb touched. This translation reflects the reading of the Septuagint. That is, so the Greek translation that's 2,000 years old made an emendation to the text. Okay, as far as Greater Sidon, the territory of Asher could not have included Sidon, a Phoenician city, but perhaps the qualifier greater is meant to suggest something like the far southern reach of the region controlled by Sidon. 83, and the territory of the Danites fell from their hands, more literally went out from them. Their original territory was in the southwestern region bordering on Philistine country, a location reflected in the stories about Samson, who was a Danite. At some relatively early point, perhaps as early as the 12th century BCE, the Danites were forced out of their original tribal territory and migrated to the far north of the country, where they conquered a new area for settlement. All right, so this explains why Don, there are some phrases in later Bible that point out how the territory of Israel stretches from Dan to Beersheba. So that understands that Dan, so Beersheba is in the south. Dan, according to this, would be in the north. So that implies that they're already in the north. But the territory as described here is in the southwest, where Gaza is, right next to Gaza. So how do they get from there all the way up to the north? So that's what Alter is explaining, that somehow it happened that they were forced out. Perhaps the Philistines forced them out. Who knows? But they had to find new territory that hadn't originally been allotted to them. Okay. The northern location is reflected in the story of Micah's idol in Judges 18. The reading of this verse in the Septuagint shows a report that might be the original version or might be an explanatory gloss. The Danites did not dispossess the Amorites, who forced them into the high country. The Amorites did not let them come down into the plain, and their territory was too confining for them. Okay, so we have different references about the territory of Dan reflected in this text and others. Okay, Lashem. Elsewhere, this town is called Laish. The Israelites gave Joshua, son of Nun, an estate in their midst. One infers that Joshua waited until all the tribes had been allocated their territories before he took his own estate. As Shmuel Achituv notes, his portion was a special assignment of territory to the commander-in-chief. Rebuilt, the Hebrew verb ordinarily means to build, but in contexts where the object is in ruins, as may be the case here because of conquest, it can mean rebuild. Okay, so now let's go on to chapter 20. It's a shorter chapter than last week. It's only 9 verses long, so we should be able to get through it. Vayidaber Adonai el Yehoshua lemor. God spoke to Joshua, saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael lemor, tenu lachem et arei hamiklat, asher dibarti alechem biyad Moshe. Speak to the people of Israel, saying, give them their refuge cities that I spoke to them at the hand of Moses. Right, so back in the Torah, in the book of Numbers, also maybe in the book of Deuteronomy, we have a discussion about these cities of refuge that are Levitical cities. Right, so there are supposed to be 3 in the land of Israel and 3 on the other side of the Jordan River. Okay, and in Talmud class a number of years ago, we talked about this in our Talmud study on the tractate Makot, talking about how you have to give time to one who commits manslaughter, and it's clear it's accidental. You have to give them enough time to get to one of these cities. So it talked about where these cities are, how they are. If you take a look at the map, you'll see that the 6 Levitical cities are parallel to each other. The 3 in the land of Israel, north to south, are parallel to the 3 that are on the other side of the Jordan River. And there has to be signs throughout the land of Israel pointing to where the city of refuge is, so that people get there and know how to get there. So the tribe of Levi doesn't have a tribal settlement because of their, they need to be available to work in the Mishkan and later in the temple. So you can't run a farm. If you're going in the middle of planting or harvest season, you're going to have to go to the temple to work. So instead, they are supported by the rest of the people of Israel. And their 6 of their cities become cities in which people who commit accidental manslaughter are able to find refuge. Right, so it reflects this ancient idea of blood guilt. So I accidentally kill Barry. According to the Torah, Barry's family is allowed to kill me in revenge. But instead of that, because that's ancient and barbaric, instead I have the right to run and seek refuge in one of these cities, and I stay there forever or until the high priest dies. The high priest dies, that's like a pardon for all those who live in the city of refuge. The challenge with that is I kill Barry, I get to the city of refuge, and the next day the high priest dies, I go free. But Barry's family still mourns his death, right? So it's not equivalency here, but it reflects the idea that we no longer see revenge like this as part of law, but recognize that it's a transition from this kind of ancient idea of revenge into a more moral, ethical, legal system. Yeah, Barry.
That's for accidental death. That's for
Yes.
manslaughter. And I should know this, but did the courts in Israel put to death people who purposefully committed murder?
Yes, and the Talmud talks about that, that there aren't actual cases in which execution actually occurred, but the Talmud talks about those cases in which execution would occur and gives great detail of how it could happen. So adding so many conditions, like let's say I plan to murder you. So I would have to do so in front of in order for me to be executed for that crime of murdering you, there would have to be 2 witnesses to the crime. So on the Zoom screen, we have 2 valid witnesses here, Leon and Jules. The rest of you on the screen are not valid witnesses. So if only women were watching me murder you, I wouldn't be executed because there weren't valid witnesses there. And the valid witnesses, Leon and Jules in this case, would have to warn me, you are about to commit murder, and if you do so, know the following. So the particular formula has to be recited. So in the heat of passion, or whatever reason it would be, I'd be murdering you. The people who are watching me, instead of just saying stop or trying to jump on top of me to get me to stop you from doing this, or running away because maybe I have 5 machine guns in my hand, so it's not exactly safe to even talk to me, let alone approach me. They have to be thinking, oh, wait a second. I have to warn him about what he's doing. So that's just what the rabbis did to make it nearly impossible.
So does that make the premeditated murder, if there's, let's say there's only 1 witness, does that make it manslaughter and city of
No.
refuge?
No, it just means that then it's up to God to punish me. So the court has its hands tied by its own rules that they are instituting in terms of not executing me. But at the same time, the court recognizes, hey, they're doing God's will, and if I'm guilty of murdering you, then God is going to punish me. And they also say, by being executed, I have been punished then for murdering you, and then I have done, that is an act of repentance. So if I repent and then I'm executed, then I have a share in the world to come, even though I die a murderer. But I've died a repentant murderer, and I still have a share in the world to come with other righteous people.
So I understand in modern Israel, only Eichmann was put to death.
Right.
So even like, let's say these terrorists that just committed these crimes, if any were caught, would this be, would it, I mean, it would be civil law, or it wouldn't be the religious law? They wouldn't go back to that, would they?
Now, Israel is not, the law of Israel is not the Talmud. The law of Israel is a combination of British, Ottoman, and Israeli law. Execution is not part of Israeli law except for Eichmann.
So does that mean that most of the terrorists that are in jails that people are asking to be released as part of a deal with Hamas right now, they weren't put to death, they weren't ever sentenced to death, they're just simply sentenced to a prison sentence?
Life in jail.
Life in jail.
It could be concurrent life, or it could be consecutive life sentences. So
it could be
they're
forever.
going to rot in jail.
Right.
Of course, Ben Gvir has said, the national security minister, right, the ultra-Orthodox Ben Gvir, or the ultra-conservative Orthodox Ben Gvir has said, oh, we should take away beds and just let them sleep on the floor and limit how much food they get In Times of Israel, see that yesterday. That's what he said about how we should treat the prisoners. So that's a whole other argument about what we're supposed to do and how we, that is the state of Israel, is supposed to act morally and ethically, and not let revenge determine how they act. Okay,
And
so
of course,
yeah.
one of the 1,000 prisoners that were released by Israel to get Shalit back, the
Yeah.
soldier, is now the head of Hamas.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, that's part of the game you play, and the risks that go with it, with negotiating with terrorists, right? It could come and bite you in the end. But a lot of factors at play, and thank God I'm not the Prime Minister of Israel to have to weigh all of these factors. It's terrible. It's terrible. You can't win. You can't win. And Israel's not going to win right now. And we only hope and pray, right? Even the most liberal in Israel, those, if you read Haaretz, and I'm sure there are more liberal outlets than that in Israel, but Haaretz is pretty liberal. Everyone, left to right in Israel, supports 100% what Israel is doing right now in defending Israel and in rooting out Hamas. No one is opposed, at least publicly, no one is opposed to the ground invasion that's about to happen and the subsequent death of thousands of Palestinians that will result as that will be a result of the ground invasion. No one's opposed to that, but Netanyahu knows he's going to have to explain it, right? And how do you explain it? How do you explain a slippery slope and still say that the slippery slope is still a moral and ethical slope to be on, right? There's a lot of gray, and if you just have to be comfortable in the gray, and you have to be able to explain the gray so that people might not agree with you, but they might acknowledge that that's still a moral and ethical, legitimate position to have. Okay, so that's Israel's challenge. That's mainly the challenge of life on the college campus. How to teach that there are several possible moral, ethical stands to take that are equally moral and ethical. So there isn't one truth. There are several truths, and it's very difficult for some people to understand that. The more fundamentalist you are, the more passionate you are about your position, the less you are willing to accept that there are other equally passionate, acceptable positions to have. Just look at abortion. The Jewish position is that sometimes abortion's okay. And depending on what circle you're walking in, you can't say that. In Judaism, the pro-life, pro-choice is not an either or. It's a sometimes. And for a lot of people, sometimes is not acceptable. Okay. So, yeah, verse 2 on page 120.
That's part of the Talmudic Torah thing. I mean, you live in the gray. I mean, you do live in the gray. I mean, we are studying this.
It's very Jewish to live in the gray.
Yeah.
And it's very Catholic to not live in the gray.
Yeah. To not everything is
and that's
prescribed.
just the way it is. It's just the way it is. And it's okay. And we have to live with it. So that's the whole Jewish enterprise is being comfortable with the choices we make. And there are guidelines to the choices we make. And there are consequences to the choices we make. We just have to live with it. And here's a way to live with it. And right, even within Judaism, from the ultra-Orthodox to the Reform, the more ultra-Orthodox you become, so the less ultra-Orthodox you are, you understand the legitimacy of the other denominations. right, like Catholicism does not acknowledge the legitimacy of other denominations of Christianity. But Protestant does, some Protestants do recognize the legitimacy of other Protestant denominations, right? So it depends on your outlook in your religion, and in Islam also. You know, there are Muslim countries in which women dress like men, hair uncovered, makeup on. Etc. There are Muslim countries where that is the case.
Yep.
And you're allowed as a Muslim to live and let live.
Which ones? Which countries?
Morocco.
I don't know.
Dubai.
We were in Morocco in last year, and
Morocco.
there's everything from women wearing full chadors who could be in the most conservative Saudi place in the world,
Next to a
others
tank top, cut
and
off.
others who looked like they could have been walking down the street in Paris, and they
Right.
would blend.
Right. Morocco, Dubai.
Thank you. I forgot that.
No. So there are countries like that.
Right.
So,
Yep.
okay. So it just living in the gray is what it means to be human, and to be Jewish means that you subscribe to a Jewish way of navigating the gray. Okay. So you have cities of refuge that are set up. Verse 3. So here goes my idea that we would get through these 9 sentences today of chapter 20. We'll see. Verse 3. Lanus shama rotseach, make nefesh bishgaga bivli da'at, v'hayu lachem lemiklat mi goel hadam. So the cities of refuge are set up, verse 3, to run away there a murderer who has killed someone accidentally. All right, so it's a rotseach, but rotseach mean a murderer, but it's not premeditated murderer. It's someone who has killed someone accidentally, bivli da'at, unknowingly, right? It wasn't purposeful. There was no forethought, no malice or forethought, right? And it would be for you a refuge, right? A miklat. Miklat is used in modern Hebrew. And that's where people ran to escape the Hamas terrorists, to the miklat, to the shelter, the bomb shelter. Migo el hadam. You're going to the shelter, the refuge from the blood avenger. Okay, so again, with my example, if I killed Barry by accident, Barry's family is the blood avenger of Barry's blood. Okay, 4.
Jonah?
Yes.
How different is this from the instruction to Moses to tell the people of Israel about the cities of refuge? Are there differences?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Yeah, I think it's the same wording. I think it's the same wording.
Isn't that
Why?
Isn't that unusual? Or I mean,
No.
Maybe it's because it was like one book, one scroll. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the laws for this are presented in the same way. 4. V'nas el achat mehe arim ha'ele ve'amad petach sha'ar ha'ir ve'diber ba'oznei ziknei ha'ir hahi et devarav ve'asfu oto ha'ira alehem ve'natnu lo makom ve'yashav imam. Now this is different. The details of how it works about how getting into the city, which verse 4 is explaining here, is not explained in the Torah. So it says he would run there to one of these cities and would stand at the opening of the gate to the city and would speak to the ears of the elders of that city his words. In other words, he'd tell the elders what happened. Tell the elders this. So if I did this to Barry, I would run to one of these cities, and I'd tell the elders there what I did. Okay, they would gather him into the city to themselves, and they would give him a place to sit among them. Okay, so the
in
Torah
Mo-
doesn't say that. This is Joshua expanding on the law of how it would happen. Yes, Bess?
in the Torah, it was the two Talmud scholars escort him.
Oh, well, because there would be a trial, and it would come to it would be proven in trial that it was an accidental manslaughter, and that I have the right to now. My punishment is that I have to go to the city of refuge. So yes, then the court would escort me there to ensure that in this case Barry's family don't kill me on the way.
So there's no court set up in this.
The court is the elders of the gate, which is an extension of what the Torah says. How are you supposed to solve cases? You go to the elders who are sitting at the gate. Where do you take your rebellious child? You take them to the elders of the gate. So that's the method here. The rabbis would interpret the elders here as being the rabbinic court. Right, so rabbis would say, we didn't invent our court system. You see it here back in the book of Joshua. Of course, they're wrong, because there was no system of Sanhedrin or rabbis in the time of Joshua, but they're just using this to kind of, in reverse logic, to prove that their system wasn't made up, and it goes all the way back. Yes, Barry?
This might be more of a Talmudic question, but you kill me, my relatives go after you, witnessed by two people. Is it premeditated? Is it city of refuge? Or is it
your relatives? If your relatives kill me on the way to the there, and it was witnessed, and they were warned, your relatives were warned not to do it, then that would be murder.
Even though it's okay to have.
No, it's not okay. It's not okay. That's right. In other words, if the blood avenger got me before I got to court, then I think that's okay. That nothing would happen to your relatives for having avenged your blood. But,
even if it was witnessed, and even if it was warned.
Well, so
that's why I said it's maybe more of a Talmudic question.
The witnessing and the warning. Yes, I'm saying I think the steps that I'm aware of from the Talmud would be: I accidentally kill you, but then I go to court to report it. So I'm in the safety of the court. The blood of your relatives can't get at me. And if they try to get at me and get to me in court to kill me before a trial happens, during the trial, after the trial, then that would be murder. But if they got me before I even got to court, I think that would be okay, and they wouldn't be prosecuted. They would be just understood as blood avengers. So if they happen, so the example in the Torah is, we're out chopping wood, which would be a natural example for you, because you chop a lot of wood on your property. So let's say two of us together are chopping wood on your property, and the axe head on my axe flies off and kills you. That's the example in the Torah. There's no one there to see it. But let's say your relatives are there too. Okay, let's just say it's like a chopping wood party that you're having, and I happen to be the only non-relative there, and my axe head accidentally kills you. Well, according to the Torah, your relatives are allowed to kill me in response to this ancient idea that your blood can't lie unavenged on the earth. Okay, so that's the example. So would, God forbid the story were true, would your relatives avenge your loss of life in that way? Who knows how people act, right? People do act bloodthirstily, and the most pacifist of people could act in a bloodthirsty way. But who knows how bloodthirsty they could be. But the Torah reflects that idea that at our core, we are animals. Okay. 5. The likelihood of us finishing this chapter is getting less and less. V'chir dof go el hadam acharav, v'lo yasgiru et harotzeach be'ado, ki bivli da'at hika et re'ehu, v'lo sonehu lo mitmol shilshom. And if the blood avenger pursues him, and they don't hand over the murderer, the manslaughterer, to the blood avenger's hands, no, they shall not hand over. So in other words, I find safety, I tell the story to the elders, I find safety in the city, right? The blood avenger comes after me. The city is supposed to protect me because I did it unawares. It was not premeditated. It was totally an accident, and I didn't hate you from before. That's the example in the Torah was, right? We're out in the woods, the axe head flies off, and there was no premeditation on my part. In other words, I didn't lure you into the woods because I hated you, right? We were there, we're friends or neutral people. There's no hatred on my part ahead of time. 6, v'yashav ba'ir hahi ad amdo lifnei ha'eda lamishpat ad mot hakohen hagadol asher yiyeh bayamim hahem az yashuv harotzeach uva el iro ve'el beito el ha'ir asher nas misham. So he should stay in that city until he would face the congregation for judgment, until the death of the high priest who would be in those days. And then the manslaughterer, the murderer, would return and arrive back at his city, to his house, to the city from which he fled. 7, Vayakdishu et Kedesh Bagalil Bahar Naphtali, Ve'et Shechem Bahar Ephraim, Ve'et Kiryat Arba Hi Chevron Bahar Yehuda. So they dedicated or sanctified these 3 cities: Kedesh in the Galilee, in the Naphtali mountains, and Shechem in the Ephraim mountains, and Kiryat Arba in Chevron in the Judean mountains. Ume'ever layarden Yericho mizracha, natnu et Betzer bamidbar bamishur mimate Reuven, ve'et Ramot bagilad mimate Gad, ve'et Golan babashan mimate Menashe. And across the Jordan from Jericho eastward, they gave Betzer in the Mishor desert, so it's translated in the wilderness, in the tableland, out of the tribe of Reuben, and Ramot in Gilad from the tribe of Gad, and Golan in Bashan from the tribe of Menashe. Okay, so these are the 3 on the other side. 9, Ele hayu arei hamu'ada lechol b'nei Yisrael v'lager hagar betocham lanus shama kol makei nefesh bishgaga v'lo yamut b'yad goel hadam ad omdo lifnei ha'eda. So these are the cities that are designated for all of the people of Israel and for the resident aliens who reside with them to flee there. All those who smite someone by accident, he shall not die by the hand of the blood avenger until he stood before the congregation. Okay, let's see if we can look at the commentaries here on page 120. Down below, and the Lord spoke, etc. The Talmud observes that the verb diber, which also has the meaning drive forward, expresses strong emphasis. It is here intended to stress the thought that Joshua was being commanded to fulfill an ordinance of the Torah, namely the establishment of cities of refuge. Rashi, in his commentary on the Talmudic passage, remarks that nowhere else is the fulfillment of a Pentateuchal injunction recorded in the later books of the Bible. Okay, that's interesting. Though the injunction to bring sacrifices in the temple, I think that's recorded later in the Bible. Certainly we have stories of Passover being observed later in the Bible. So it's interesting that Rashi is saying that this is the only law of all the laws given in the Torah where we actually follow through. Okay, that could be the case, aside from sacrifices. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, this is the only instance outside of the Torah where it is very frequent of the use of this formula. Daber el b'nai Israel. Right, so God spoke to Joshua, speak to the people of Israel. Right? The formula in the Torah is God spoke to Moses, speak to the people of Israel, or God spoke to Moses and Aaron, speak to the people. So this is the only time where you have that formula being used. Assign you the cities of refuge. Now that the division of the promised land was complete, the Israelites were commanded to set aside cities of refuge, as Moses had proclaimed in the Torah, when the Lord your God will cut off the nations, and you dost succeed them and dwell in their cities and houses. 3 cities shall you separate. Whereof I spoke unto you, see Numbers 35, verse 10. The avenger of blood, page 121, the Goel, a near kinsman, who regarded it as his duty to avenge the homicide by killing even its unintentional perpetrator. The provision of cities of refuge was consequently a humanizing measure of great ethical and social importance. If the Goel killed the murderer outside the limits of the refuge cities, however, he was exempt from capital punishment. Right, so that's from the Talmud. And declare his cause, he avows that the killing was accidental and not premeditated. They shall take him into the city. This was done provisionally until he stood his trial. Right, again, standing before the congregation here in Joshua is understood by the Talmud as meaning there's a trial taking place. And give him a place that is rent-free. Just as the Levites were given the right to live there, so also the unwitting slayer had the right to live in these cities and was therefore entitled to live there rent-free. And hated him not, that we should believe that he killed him stealthily. If the murderer was an enemy of the murdered, he is not afforded the benefit of refuge unless it's certain that the act of murder could not have been intentional. Right, so you have to prove that his possible premeditation, like I hated you, Barry, in this case, did not factor into the accidental killing of you. Until he stand before the congregation for judgment, if he be freed from exile, he is dismissed. If, however, he is sentenced to exile, he is remanded to this refuge city, where he must dwell until the death of the high priest. Right, so just Rashi explaining the legalities. Thus, the scripture gives 2 instances of the termination of the murderer's stay in the refuge city. 1, in the case of his being exonerated, he must stay only until he stand before the congregation for judgment. And 2, in the case of his being found guilty of unwitting murder, which could have been avoided until the death of the high priest. Right, so it's a purely an accident. There's nothing he could have done to avoid it. He can leave. But if there could have been, right, like I think the Talmud gives examples of the rungs on the ladder. One of the rungs was not maintained properly, so I could be at fault if you climbed the ladder and stepped on that rung and then fell to your death. So there's some responsibility on my part. Then I have to stay in the city. And they set apart, they assigned. Rather, they had assigned. These cities had already been assigned during Moses' lifetime, as is related in Deuteronomy 4. The cities were chosen for their accessibility from every part of the country. Kadesh Sion, chapter 12. In Galilee to serve the northern region extending from the valley of Jezreel to the foot of Lebanon. Shechem, the modern Nablus, to serve the central region. Kiryat Arba, see on chapter 14, to serve the southern region. The Jordan at Jericho, this phrase, as a rule, is to be understood literally, namely, the section of the Jordan facing Jericho. Here, the entire length of the Jordan is meant. The 6 cities of refuge, namely the 3 already set aside by Moses on the eastern side of the Jordan, and the 3 now set aside by Joshua on the western side, were arranged in a double row running north and south, similar to 2 rows of vines in a vineyard. The 3 cities on the west of the Jordan run parallel to the 3 cities on the east. That's what I said earlier. Betzer in the wilderness, it was the most southerly of the cities of refuge in Transjordan, corresponding to Jericho in western Canaan. Ramoth in Gilead, also called Ramat Mitzpeh in chapter 13, and Ramoth Gilead in 1 Kings. Golan in Bashan, the most northerly city in Transjordan, corresponding to Kedesh in western Canaan. It's perhaps the modern Jaulan, north of the Yarmouk. Might flee thither. In later times, precautions were taken to keep these roads free from obstructions, with signposts at every crossroad marked refuge. Once there, the slayer was assigned a dwelling. And then on 123, as already mentioned, the cities in Transjordan had already been set apart by Moses for this purpose, but they were not put into use until the 3 in Eretz Yisrael proper were set apart. The Levitical cities, too, were classified as cities of refuge.
Jonah,
Yes, Bess.
about more than 50% of the notes are different,
Yeah,
really different.
yeah. I assumed that from just the references to Rashi and everything, that you didn't have that in the
Right.
older edition.
Yeah, a lot of it, I got confused. I
Yeah,
looked.
yeah.
You couldn't
That's
follow what line you were up to. It doesn't matter.
right.
I don't think-
Okay, we have to stop here. We'll read the Ancient Israel on chapter 20 next time. There will be a next time. My trip to Israel obviously is canceled, so we will have class the next 2 Fridays.
Sederot was on your schedule, right?
Yes, yeah, it was.
What was it? Was there a
We were supposed to
specific?
just meet with people there who would talk about life outside of Gaza. Yeah, so now the whole world knows what life outside of Gaza is like. All right, have a good rest of the day. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
Shabbat shalom.